Hi, everyone. My name is Brady Josephson. I'm the Managing Director here at the NextAfter Institute, and I will be also the chat moderator today. So if you're just joining us, the question that we're asking in the chat just to get things started while people are joining is, where are you tuning in from? Where in the country are you? Or where in Canada or the world are you, I guess? And what's one or two things that you're hoping to get out of today? If you want to chat those in, get a handle on the chat. I see someone from Victoria, British Columbia, my former homeland. Thanks for joining. We already had some great responses in there. Today, we're talking all about donation pages. And Nathan Hill is going to go over 5 ways your donation page could be failing your donors. So that's the topic for today. That is where we're headed. And I'm actually just going to hand it over to Nathan, and he's going to take it from here. So Nathan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brady. It's really fun looking through some of these responses here, because I think it means that you're in the right place to get some of these answers, because I believe we have a different strategy or tactic for almost every single one of these ideas. So some things we are going to talk about today. Looks like Craig is asking or saying he's looking to have a more effective donation page to increase online donations. Everything you're going to see today is about increasing donations on your page. I know there was a comment about, how do we actually talk to people that are already on the page, and how do we understand their motivations? We're going to talk about that. We're going to cover a lot of stuff today, and there's going to be a whole lot more that we actually don't get into as well. We have a bunch of other free resources. I'm going to share some different ideas for next steps with you. But before we jump into any of the details here, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. And number one is this is the most popular question, honestly, is there going to be a recording? And the answer is always yes. So we are recording this right now. Once the webinar is over, we'll process that, we'll post the video, and then this evening, I'll actually send you an email with the link to the recording, as well as some slides and some other resources that we mentioned throughout the day today as well. And very important is that we do have time for some Q&A at the end of the presentation. So all throughout, using that same chat box you just used to tell us where you're listening in from, what you're hoping to get out of today, use that same chat box to pop in your ideas, thoughts, commentary, or questions all throughout the presentation. Brady's going to be watching those, taking some notes, and then we'll have time to circle back on those questions at the very end. Here's where you can actually put that in the chat box on the right side of your screen. A couple more things. We have kind of a next step out of today, something for you to consider while we're going through this today, is actually a full day live certification workshop. It's virtual. We try to do these in person when we can, but for right now, we're doing these virtually. But you can actually go through the whole donation and landing page optimization certification course live with myself and Brady. We're going to dive into the 3 different types of donation pages. We'll look at email acquisition pages, some of the underlying theory behind what makes an effective donation or landing page. So you can find out all the details of this and register at nextafter.com/virtual-workshop. It is $199 per person. There is a cost to it, but it's well worth it. You can find out more at that link. Brady mentioned this. My name is Nathan Hill. I'm the marketing director here at NextAfter. And again, it's just my pleasure to be here with you today. I know I don't take it lightly that you're here. You're spending an hour plus today with us to learn about donation pages and how to improve them. So I want to make the most of your time. I will throw this out there. Today's session is basically session 5 from this donation landing page optimization course, where we're talking specifically about the main donation page. Now, we don't have time to get into all the little nuances and details that we do in the course, but we're going to hit on most things from this one session at least. But I want to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, if you will, of what a main donation page is, because that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today. So if you go to a website like this is the ACLU homepage. The main donation page is where you land if you click on this little donate link, donate button in the top navigation. It's probably on your side as well, in the far right corner most commonly. Maybe it says donate, maybe it says support, maybe it says give, something like that. This is the link to the main donation page. It's really the primary place on your site where you're actually giving someone the opportunity to give. So if someone goes to your site to organically find a way to give, that's where they're going to land. This is what the actual page looks like. In this case, the specifics of pages look very different from organization to organization. There's some common threads, but as far as design goes, things can be all over the place. But this is the general donation page or the main donation page. We're not talking about a specific landing page that you pair with an email campaign or an instant donation page, which we'll talk maybe a little bit about. We're talking about the primary donation page. So now that we are all on the same page, pun somewhat intended, let's start with an experiment, as we always like to do. This organization is called the Illinois Policy Institute, and the research question is which main donation page design is going to increase donations. Important caveat, if at all. It's important to go into an experiment understanding that, maybe neither of these designs are actually going to beat the other one or be the most effective, so we can keep that sort of in balance. But here's the original or the control. This is the page that they started with. You see at the very top, there's some navigation links, there's a search bar, there's menu, you have a big hero image, and it says Illinois' comeback story starts here. And then you can't really read the text because it's very small, but in that little red bar, there's like one sentence of copy, and you've got some little icons, social icons, and then you have the donation form. So it gets right into it, making the assumption that someone who comes to this page is ready to give. They don't need much explanation as to why, they just want to get right after it and make that donation. It's a very common assumption. Now the treatment was a little bit different. The treatment has the same header, has the same hero image, that same big headline, Illinois' comeback story starts here, but you see the main difference is really all this copy. So now it's very copy heavy. There's like 4 or 5 paragraphs of copy explaining why someone should give and what they actually saw as the result here. Let's show them side by side. Again, the original, very little copy, basically one sentence. Version B, the treatment, lots of copy. And what they saw was a 150% increase in donations. Now, for some of you, this probably was like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And others of you are probably saying like, what? If someone came to the main donation page, aren't they ready to give? Haven't they come to my site with the intention of giving? They click the donate button in the corner. Obviously, they know what's coming on the other end. They come to a donation page. Why would we be able to see such a big increase in donations if someone already has a motivation to give? How can we really move the needle that much? And really, people are motivated, but there's some caveats. There's kind of this tug of war going on, where on one side, there's an internal motivation or an internal, at least interest to give. There's some type of mission in their brain that they've come to your page hoping to accomplish. But at the same time, there's always this like fight or flight type of syndrome. We're looking for potential reasons to bail. We're trying to mitigate risk. We're trying to understand, are there potential risks in me actually donating? Maybe it's, I'm anxious about all my personal information, my credit card getting stolen or something like that. Maybe it's a lack of clarity about what I'm actually giving to. There's all these reasons that we start to second guess why we might give that could lead us to bail, even though we came in with the intention of giving. So we have to keep this in mind. The reason that this treatment won is because it more fully understood the motivation of the donor and aligned the messaging and the design of the page to that motivation. We're going to talk in depth today about what that motivation looks like and all the different elements that you can use to try to address that. But we have to keep this in mind as kind of an underlying rule throughout everything we talk about today. You cannot assume that people are already ready to donate when they come to your donation page. We can't assume they're already fully motivated. If we assume that, then we're going to lose a lot of donations and we're going to fail a lot of potential or would-be donors. Now, interesting question is just simply, how are we doing as nonprofits, as fundraisers, and across the industry? Where are we at? Let's kind of take the pulse, take the temperature a bit. A common question and an important question is, how many visitors are actually donating? How many people come to a main donation page and actually end up giving a gift? Now, M&R produces some really, really cool benchmark data that they release every year. And the most recent metrics that they released say this, that 22% of people that come to a donation page give. Which on the surface sounds pretty good. If you break it down by vertical, there's some variance. You see cultural related groups have much higher conversion rates. International groups have lower conversion rates. There's some variance across the board, but on average, 22% of visitors are donating when they hit a donation page. Now, it's easy to map this to the typical like sales funnel, customer funnel, donation funnel. Like this, people visit your page and they start moving down this funnel. So they go from visit to starting to reading all the way to the actual form. And then you have beginning the donation process. So they've actually clicked how much they want to give and they actually pulled out their wallet and they're getting their credit card out and they're ready to give. And then moving all the way to completing the donation, where you actually have now the funds in hand to go put to work to impact your cause. And 22% of people on average complete this process. But what we often fail to look at or recognize is the inverse of this conversion rate or donation completion rate, which is this, a 78% failure rate. 78% of the time, on average, we're failing the people that have come to our pages with an intention and desire to give and to donate. And this is a problem. But potentially, this funnel is actually leading to sort of a false view of how we can address our donors. And we might need to change it up a bit. And here's why. Now, I'm a big coffee snob. I love having a good cup of coffee. We don't have a drip coffee machine at home, again, because we're snobs and we just do V60s and pour overs. And for a pour over to work, you have to have gravity. And really any cup of coffee, you have to have gravity. So you're pouring the water over the top, gravity is moving the water down through the grounds, and you ultimately get this end result of a great cup of coffee. But again, gravity has to be at work in your favor. But this is not the case in fundraising. This is not the case of donations or donors. In fact, we like to flip this on its head because the actual external forces in the environment are not helping our donors complete a donation. It's actually weighing them down and holding them down. So we like to flip this funnel on its head and call it a donor mountain. And that's really much more realistic as to what this journey looks like. Where someone comes to your page at the very bottom of this mountain, and they have all sorts of distractions, even just from the external forces, not even on your page. So, I come to your page, I'm interested in donating, but I also need to go take care of my kids or pick them up from school, or I need to go make dinner, or I need to do whatever, get back to work on this project. I have all these external factors that are actually potentially keeping me from giving. But this whole process maps cleanly to this donor mountain journey. So you have people that visit the page, and then the next step they take is to start reading, and they have to read to the form, and they have to begin the donation process, and then finally complete a donation at the very top. Now, interestingly enough, we do have a tool to help donors actually ascend the mountain. As fundraisers, we have the value proposition, or the answer to the question of why should I give to you? Now, the way we answer this question and communicate it through our copy and through our design is what can actually help pull our donors up the mountain, helping them say yes at every single one of these steps until they ultimately donate. So this is how we can start to think about our pages in a very theoretical, conceptual way to actually get down to the brass tacks of how are we going to implement copy and design and all these different elements that we're going to talk about today. Let's look at a couple things from this study we conducted last year in partnership with Raise Donors called the State of Nonprofit Donation Pages, where we actually went out, we looked at over 200 organizations, we looked at their donation pages, really to understand how well are nonprofits doing across the board in terms of all these different elements that we've tested and proven to be more effective at getting donations. Now, we applied a scoring model from 0 to 100%, and across different verticals, you can kind of see the breakdown, but overall, on average, nonprofits scored about a 57%. That's the median score, which certainly is not an A+. I think when I was in school, that was an F, if not, or a D-, if not an F. So room for improvement is the best way to frame that. There's lots of opportunity, which is really, really good, regardless of what vertical that you are in. But this is also the case by size of organization. So regardless of what vertical, sometimes we like to think that, well, organizations that have a lot more capacity and resources and money are just going to be more effective. But that's not really the case. Now, smaller organizations, $0 to $10 million in annual revenue, tend to have a little bit more room or a little bit more opportunity, but everybody has a lot of room to grow, which is actually good news because that means that you have opportunity to increase that conversion rate and increase revenue and donations. So our goal by the end of today is that you would be able to craft a main donation page that connects to the motivations of your potential donors. Our key driving question all throughout is, how do I create a donation page that is optimized? Now, we have a research library of over 2,500 online fundraising experiments. A portion of those are directly related to donation pages and the main donation page. And using the learnings from that library and body of research, we've actually created this donation page template. I'm not going to tell you that it's the ultimate donation page template that's going to maximize your donations forever. It's a better starting place. I'm going to call it a better starting place because all these experiments, which is what you see on the top and the bottom and the left and the right of this template, these are all experiments pointing to things that we've learned work or don't work, elements you should include or shouldn't include to give you a better starting place to optimize your donation page. We do not have time in the next 45 minutes to go experiment by experiment by experiment. We will run out of daylight, honestly, today. We don't even have time during the whole day. But what we are going to do is we're going to look at these 5 key areas where we often fail our donors. And they are these elements that are in your control: your main message, your template design, donation selection, which is really just a fancy way of saying gift array, personal information put, or your form fields. What are you actually asking for on your form? And then your supporting message and supporting content. Number 1, we're going to jump into your main message. And our underlying principle, we'll look at a couple of experiments, but our underlying principle here is this: you need to make your main message as inclusive as possible. But not inclusive to the entire globe or to the entire world, but specifically you need to make it as inclusive of your ideal donors as possible. understanding that someone who types in www.organization.org and comes to your page and clicks donate, there's a wide variety of thought processes there of people coming to your page with different ideas of things that they value about your organization that we have to be broad enough to encompass and specific enough for them to feel like this is something I want to give to. And it's kind of like writing a fortune in a fortune cookie, which sounds a little bit goofy. And honestly, John Powell, who put some of these original ideas together, when he shared this idea with me, I thought it was hilarious and goofy, like what in the world are you talking about? But it's really fun and it makes sense. So imagine that you have been eating a wonderful meal, and the whole time you're eating your Chinese food, you're hoping that by the end, I'll have a little bit of room for this fortune cookie, and you've been savoring it and you're ready, and you crack it open and you're ready to read your fortune or get your lucky numbers, and there's nothing. There's nothing. It's gonna be a huge letdown. It's super disappointing. Well, like, what do I do with this? You almost just get frustrated. Why would you want to eat the cookie? Because the cookies aren't often that great. You're really just after the fortune. So it's a letdown. And that's kind of what happened on this page, is in version A, there's no copy, there's no fortune, there's no reason why I should give other than just a donation form and some social sharing links, basically. But version B actually uses copy to explain why I should give and addresses that donor motivation right there. So there is a fortune. And that's why it led to an increase, is because there was actually something there. Now imagine that you open your fortune cookie and you get something like this. A short stranger will soon enter your life with blessings to share. Now you can look at the top little, this is from Reddit, the top little headline there. My wife is 24 weeks pregnant today. This is what her Chinese fortune cookie had to say. And you see how relevant this is for someone in this situation. But interestingly enough, this is probably relevant for you, or feels relevant for you. It feels relevant for me. Maybe I'm going to, when I leave work today and I walk out to the parking lot, I'm going to meet someone who is just simply shorter than me and is someone I don't know. And we're going to, a great friendship is going to blossom. It feels specific, it feels tangible, but it's relevant to really anyone in any situation. And that's kind of what we're going for on our pages. Again, keeping in mind that these are mass produced, they're not written for a specific individual. They're written and they're put in these fortune cookies and they're shipped out across at least the country, probably the globe, and they still feel relevant even though they're mass produced. So this is what we need to do with our copy and our main messages. We need to keep it broad. We need to keep it all encompassing of all these different motivations that someone could be bringing to the table, while also making it feel tangible. And in the formatting, we need to make it scannable. So it's easy to read, it's easy to process, easy to understand. Here's an experiment. Version A versus version B, these are the same page. The form is the same and all that stuff. The difference is really just in the copy. Now we're going to walk through this, but before we walk through it, let's look at the result. Version B, just up front, led to a 30% decrease in donations. And then obviously the question we need to ask is why? What actually happened that led to this decrease? And we can start to sort of tease out some of these reasons as we compare the copy. Version A versus version B. Version A says your gift helps reach the lost with the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is a faith-based ministry submitted to our library, just so you know kind of the context. Version B says tell others about Jesus. These are the headlines, and they go on from there. Version A starts with when you donate to Harvest, you join a team that's committed to knowing God and making him known, and they go into talking about why you should donate to the organization and what their values are. Version B starts with a specific story, just as Paul was called to take the message, and then it goes into the specifics of the story and the narrative. Version A then continues with some bullet points, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are 4 key ways that we're going to use your gift to make an impact on the thing that you care about. Version B continues the story. It actually starts up kind of like another story. Since the age of 19, when he formed a small group and became one of the largest churches and ministries in the United States, is talking about a specific story and a specific narrative. And it's a little bit in the weeds, and you have to read every single word to really understand what's happening. Whereas version A, it's quick, it's scannable, and it's tangible. You get to the bottom, version A says use your gift using the form below is a fast, secure way to help reach the lost with the gospel, make your gift. Version B says your gift to Harvest Ministries will help this specific thing, will help this specific issue or this specific cause. It's getting too focused and too narrow, or version A is actually talking about the organization as a whole and some of their key values and key things that you can actually impact. So it's addressing this broad range of motivations coming to the page, where version B is a little bit too narrow, which is why it saw a decrease of 30% in donations. So we have to keep it broad, all encompassing, but it also needs to be tangible and scannable. So you see that in the copy examples right there. We also need to do this. We need to allow visitors to use their own mind and their life for visuals. And really, ultimately where I'm going is this: no videos, please. Now, I'm sure at least half of you just like no videos, like videos, we do videos, we're gonna do videos. And then the other half, maybe you're just confused because what we've been told time and time again is that videos are super effective for telling stories, which is true, but they're not necessarily effective for conversion, which is what we see in this experiment and many others like it. This is not isolated to one experiment. We've tested this over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Version A in this experiment uses a video on the donation page. It's the president of this organization talking about why you should give, very simply. Version B is actually the same message. The copy is the same, but instead of using a video to communicate kind of the core of why you should give, they took the transcript, they pulled out the key points of value, and they plugged it into copy. So the message is the same on version A and version B, but the medium of communicating it is different. And here's what they saw. 500, this isn't like, oh, a 3% increase in donations. It's a 560% increase in donations by using copy and text instead of a video, which is fascinating. And there's lots of hypotheses that we have as to why this might be the case. But one common one is if you're going to watch a video, you have to click play and then you sit back. And maybe it's a minute and a half, or maybe it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then you're watching it and you're not really actively engaged. It's more of passive viewership. Or version B, you're actively engaging in the copy, and then you're starting to paint a picture in your own mind of what the impact looks like, as opposed to seeing it through someone else's lens. Almost like when you read a book and then you go see the movie, and then you're let down because the characters don't look like what you thought they looked like, and the voices are a little bit different, and the setting is a little bit different. This could be the same kind of thing going on. But again, we've tested this over and over and see the same result. Don't use video, use copy. We also want to remind them of the desired action and its effect. And what that means is really we need to call them to do something. So in version A, the specifics of the copy aren't important here, but version A talks about why you should give, and then there's a form below it. Version B talks about why you should give, same exact copy, but it includes an actual call to action. Your donation will advance your principles. Here's the impact it's going to make. Will you give? That's really the difference. And it led to a 49% increase in donations because you reinforced why you should give, you communicated value, and you actually called them to do something. It's really easy to forget this step. We just assume that people understand why there's a donation form there and can make all the ties in their own mind. But actually calling them to action makes a really big difference. So here's a checklist for you when you're thinking about how you actually craft your main message. Number one, do you have one? Is it more than just one sentence or 2 sentences? Do you have a significant reason why on your page using copy why someone should give? Does your main message say broad and focus primarily on your organization's values and larger impact as opposed to a specific issue? Is your main message quickly scannable? Again, we don't want people to get lost in the weeds of having to read through a story. There's already a certain level of motivation there to give. We want to quickly help them understand why they should give. And then number 4, do you include a call to action? You have to call them to give. So that's the main message. If you're going to do one thing out of this, make sure that you have copy on your page, communicating why they should give to you rather than some other organization or not at all. Interestingly enough, 30% of nonprofits had less than 1 sentence on their donation page when we went out and did that study. So 1 in 3 organizations, it could be you. Maybe take a look at your page today and see if you have copy or enough copy. That's the main message. You're through number 1 of 5, and we're going to keep rolling. Number 2 is looking at the template design. So this really is everything from imagery to layout to things in the header and navigation. We're going to look at a few different test examples, experiment ideas. But again, the underlying principle is maybe what you should take away from today is that we want to design our pages so that they lead our potential donor to a donation without distractions and without misdirecting them. Let's look at what that means. Here's kind of a fun example. A question for you. You can even sound off in the chat if you want to. Would you sit in this chair? Or maybe a better question is, would you have this chair in your house or your apartment or wherever you live and actually ask a guest to sit in this chair? The answer is probably not, because that looks so uncomfortable. I mean, that's going to be rough. You're going to last about 60 seconds and then bail on that and just sit on the floor, because design has to serve a purpose and not just look nice. Well, in this case, the purpose is that this is probably something better suited for an art museum, something interesting to look at as opposed to being functional. The same type of principle can apply on our donation pages. We'll look at this example and one more as well. In this one, we're actually just looking specifically at the navigation. It's really common to see a donation page that has a bunch of like the normal site navigation options still at the top. But imagine that you have just come to the homepage and you click donate, and then you get to the donation page, and then immediately you're being asked to do something else other than donate. That doesn't really make sense, but this is the common experience. We're asking, in this case, for people to look at bridge to well-being or policies that could impact you, or why don't we go look at events or a blog? I know you said you want to donate, but why don't you go look at something else that's different than what you said you want to do? It's misdirecting and it's distracting. Version B removes the navigation, and just that simple change led to a 195% increase in donations. Because we didn't ask them to do something other than donate. We led them through the page that leads towards a donation, which is what they told us they wanted to do. It sounds really simple, but it's really common to keep the navigation. So make sure you keep an eye on that. Here's another experiment that looks more just at layout. So version A, you have this sort of two-column approach. You've got an image on the top left, and then you have some trust marks as to why you should trust this organization. Then you've got some other links of different ways to give and things like that. Version B moves all those extra links, actually way below, you can't even see it in the screenshot, down below to the footer, which is probably a better place for them. And then the image moves to the right side of the page. So it's not the first thing, it's not the primary thing on the page. The primary thing is the copy, and then moves the image to more of a supporting content position. And this led to a 5.5% increase in donations, which maybe you're saying, well, I just saw 195. Is 5 really, does it matter? Well, depending on the volume, depending on how many people come to your page, this could be really, really, really significant. So keep that in mind. We don't want this two-column approach that kind of misdirects people. We want a single column, top to bottom, and putting that imagery in that right column, the right-hand side supporting content position. Now, you may hear me saying this, that design is the devil, and I want to say that it's not. That would be wrong. There are ways that you can keep your pages pretty and also get high conversion. This is one example of getting everything sort of in the right thought sequence. There's probably opportunity to improve this page with more copy and maybe pulling your headline out of the image so it's a little bit more legible. But you see there's nice imagery, there's nice colors and all that stuff. It feels nice, it looks nice. You don't have to sacrifice good design or something that looks good for the sake of conversion. They can both exist in harmony and love and peace, and that's great. So design is not the devil. Here's an interesting example. If we actually move down to the gift array, version A uses radio buttons. I'm not sure how many of you use radio buttons on your donation page. I know most tools that you're using now don't default to that. They use more of these HTML buttons. But if you're in the situation where you have radio buttons on your page, I'd reconsider it, because just turning that into these more button-like HTML buttons led to a 63% increase in donations. Now imagine you're on a mobile device and you have a bunch of little radio buttons and you're trying to push the radio buttons, but your finger is as big as like 3 of them. Like, that's just a frustrating experience. So this is an example of how additional design elements can actually improve conversion. Now, your checklist here for design, template, layout. Does your main donation page include header links? If so, I'd get rid of them. Number 2, does the formatting and the color scheme make it harder to read and process your image? Consider that. We don't want to put a lot of text overlaying an image that makes it really hard to read. Actually move it into the main body of your page. Number 3, our design elements are using them when it's appropriate, such as like a gift array, where it's actually more helpful to have some type of like designed button as opposed to just the standard HTML radio button. If you're going to do one thing, again, make sure there's no distracting links on your page that are going to lead people down a different path than what they said they wanted to do, which is donate. Interestingly enough, looking back at the research, it's really, really common. 55% of nonprofits actually have distracting links in the navigation and on their page. 55%, that's more than half. So it likely is you. Go check it out on your page. And then what about multiple calls to action? Asking someone to do multiple things. 38% of organizations are asking people to do multiple things on their page. These are little factors that are contributing to that 78% failure rate. And they're pretty simple things to actually address and improve. Number 3, donation selection. And again, donation selection is a fancy way to say your gift array. How do you handle it? How do you treat it? An underlying guiding rule, guiding principle is that we want to avoid appearing too transactional. We want to avoid this type of feeling where you're entering into some type of contract or negotiation, or we want to avoid even just the mindset that people commonly have on like an e-commerce site. So if you're buying something on Amazon, where you're really trying to consider, am I getting the most value personally for my dollar? We want to avoid that type of mindset. But we commonly think as fundraisers that, the gift array is just this cool tool that we have where we can sort of like manipulate the numbers and tweak the math in order to get the best average gift. but we really want to avoid that type of mindset. So we don't get people thinking about what can I get back in return, but we're focused on what kind of impact can I make? And there is a key difference there. Here's one interesting example. And this one is specifically for the main donation page. So don't consider this for like a campaign page that you might send someone to from an email. This is just for your main donation page. But in version A, they have a gift array. They have 6 options ranging from $25 to $500. And then you have this other gift amount box. Version B, they got rid of the gift array and they just kept an open form field where someone can actually say exactly how much they want to give without really being primed or led to a default gift amount. And what they saw was a 126% increase in donations. This is not for everyone. And here's why. Because this worked, because this page had a lot of repeat or returning donors. We commonly see an open field works if you have people coming back, giving an additional gift, like their second gift or their third gift, or they already have a certain level of familiarity with you. Because there's high trust, you don't have to prime them as much as to what level of a gift is valuable. Now, if you also have a high conversion rate, so maybe in the 130 to 150 or above range, then you can try this open field as well. Commonly, this leads to an increase in average gift size. And then if you have this type of situation, it could lead to an increase in total donations as well. Again, this is just for the main donation page. Here's another little example about this transactional mindset that we mentioned. So in version A, standard gift array, 3 options, open field. Version B, same exact thing, except now below, you have this little bit of copy. It changes the mindset. It's a little bit of copy, but changes the mindset significantly. Your gift of $100 qualifies you for this membership. For only 150 more, you can be upgraded to this other membership. And now, just in that like sentence and a half, my brain has pivoted from thinking about what kind of impact I can make with this gift to what kind of impact they can make on me. What am I going to get for my dollar? I give $100, I get this, but if I give $150, then I get this back. We want to avoid that type of mindset because this actually led to a 22% decrease in revenue. This is a common strategy to try to increase average gift. But again, on this page, we have to keep total number of donations and average gift sort of in balance and see what actually is going to lead to the most revenue. And not just revenue now, but also like lifetime value of a donor. Would you rather have more donors or would you have a little bit more revenue now or a little bit higher average gift now? So you have to kind of keep those things in balance. Now, one more principle I want to talk about related to the gift array is this idea of the power of choice. Now, there's this kind of cool experiment. This company who's selling jellies did this little A/B test in grocery stores. And in version A, they had 24 of these different like exotic jelly flavors. And they have these big displays where you could go look at all these different flavors and ooh and ah over like, oh, that's in it. I've never heard of that before. That sounds interesting. Versus in another set of stores where they just had 6. They limited the options. Now, version A had a lot more people to stop and look at them and ooh and ah over them. Version B led to 505% increase in purchases. Would you rather have more people go, ooh, interesting, or more people actually donate? Now, it comes down to this idea of decision friction. If we have too many options given to us, it can actually make us just bail and choose the unspoken option of not giving at all. It can be too hard to make a decision if there are too many choices. This is a really cool experiment to illustrate that as an international relief type of group where you can sponsor a child. And in version A, you can actually search for a child by your birthday. So you put in your birthday, and then it filters all the options to all the kids that have the same birthday as you do, which is kind of cool. Version B, they changed it up a bit, where instead of sending you this whole like catalog of children to choose from to sponsor, they actually just serve up one individual child in need of a sponsorship. And what they saw by limiting the amount of decisions was a 14% increase in donations. And especially in this case, consider in version A, you're not just being asked to choose from 50 kids to sponsor, if that's how many come up. You're also sort of being asked to choose which 49 kids are you not going to sponsor. You have to choose 1 out of 50 or however many come up on the page. You're choosing a certain amount of kids to not sponsor. And that's a really hard decision to make, and you might be more inclined to just bail. So by limiting the decisions, because there still is choice, you can choose to sponsor or not, there's still choice, you're in control. That actually led to a 14% increase in donations by limiting the decision options. We want to empower donors to choose without overwhelming them with too many choices. So here's your donation selection checklist. Number 1, does your main donation page have a higher than average size gift? If so, try using that open form field. Number 2, are you trying to push an average gift increase in an unnatural way that sounds a little bit too transactional? Be really, really, really careful about that. And then number 3, are you offering choice, but not too much choice? Don't overwhelm with decisions. One thing to really look at is, what is the copy on your page doing? Does it sound opportunistic? Are you trying to sort of, this is a really common thing that we see, trying to sort of game the average gift a bit. So be really careful of your copy. Make a note to look at this in your page today. Here's another kind of cool example related to the gift array, sort of a bonus one, a more recent experiment, is actually playing with how do you default a gift amount in an effective way. Now, a really common way is to just sort of highlight it like you see in version A. But in the treatment, I actually applied this most popular box and icon around the default gift amount. And what this did was it led to an increase in the feeling that like, oh, this is what everyone else is doing? Yeah, I'll do that too. Which led to a 7.8% increase in conversion rate. It led to almost a 15% increase in average gift size, which led to a 23.8% increase in revenue. Just in this small little design tweak. It's crazy how these little design tweaks can actually make a significant impact on how someone's thinking and feeling as they go through this process. Interestingly enough, it had a much larger impact on a mobile device user than it did on a desktop user, because it made it much more easier as you're on your phone and you're scrolling through and you get to this point of deciding how much to give. Oh, it's a lot less friction-y to actually have a clearly called out default gift amount using that most popular icon. So it made it really easy. Anyway, consider that in your gift array. Let's jump to personal information input. And this is, again, just a fancy way to say, what are you asking for in your form? Now, we have an underlying driving principle behind this, which is what you want to ultimately do, regardless of the specific tactics. We want to minimize the perceived amount of input. So we want to keep donors from thinking that there's too much work that they have to do, even if you're not, and we'll look at some examples, even if you're not changing the number of form fields, even using design to change how they're laid out, to make it seem like there's less work. That's ultimately our goal. This is kind of a fun little research study that was done just on how people feel waiting in line, specifically waiting in line at a grocery store. Do you remember what it's like to go to the grocery store, or have you just been doing like Instacart or like pickup deliveries or Kroger pickup or something like that? Soon enough, we'll all be back at the grocery store waiting in these lines. But there are some really interesting studies that have been done, and I want to call out just a couple of things because it's really fascinating. And we'll read this together. When someone waits longer than 3 minutes in a grocery line, or in a line in general, they start to multiply, and we as people, we as humans start to multiply how long we've actually been waiting. For instance, after people waited for 5 minutes, they often told people that they had been waiting for 10. Started to multiply it by a factor of 2, which is fascinating. And this is just an interesting little point. Men are far more likely to give up on a line than women. So congratulations, women are far more patient. Men started to inflate the amount of time and actually bail on a line after 2 minutes, where women it started after 3 minutes. So again, congratulations, women are far more patient. We need to understand this, that someone's perception and how they perceive how long they've waited in line, or how they perceive how much work our donation page is going to be, that is the reality. If you went up to someone who's been waiting in line for 5 minutes and you said, hey, how long have you been waiting in line? And they said, oh, probably 10 minutes, this line's not moving. And you said, did you know you've actually only been waiting for 5? And after 5 minutes, you start to multiply it by 2. And so you actually think it's been 10 minutes, but it's only been 5. Are they going to be like happy about that? Or are they going to be even more frustrated? They're probably going to be more frustrated because their reality is that they had been there for 10 minutes. And now you're telling them it's been not even that long, which is way worse. So the perception is the reality. And we have to understand this as donors are looking at our pages. Version A and version B are the exact same form. Do you believe me? They look different, but the number of fields, the types of fields, the required information is all the same. Version A stacks everything from top to bottom. All the fields are on top of each other. Version B starts to group common and similar fields together. So first and last name are both on the same line. City, state, and zip are both on the same line. Email address and preferred phone, they're both on the same line. And as you start to group them together, the length of the page gets shorter and it feels like less work. And it actually led to a 39% increase in donations, which is so cool and so fascinating, just how the brain works in perceiving how much work is going to be there. So that's one thing you can keep in mind, is actually reducing what we call field layout friction. We want to group these similar fields together as much as we can to make it feel like less work. This example, there's one clear difference where version B actually added a cell phone field. By just adding this one field, it actually led to a 50% decrease in revenue. Because what happens the moment you ask for a phone number? as the donor or as the person signing up for an email newsletter, whatever the ask is, if you ask for a phone number, the perception is that you're going to call them. And I don't want you to call me. Some people do. Certainly some people do and might expect that thank you call. So we've actually seen that you can put a phone field on a form and just not require it, and it doesn't tend to make any impact on donations, but you start to get phone numbers. But a large amount of people don't want you to call them because they already get enough spam calls anyway. I'm not going to give you my phone number. It led to a giant decrease in revenue. So be careful of that. Be careful of adding additional fields that aren't perceived as necessary. We call this field number friction. Here's a kind of a fun and interesting example of what we call confusion friction. So at this point on the page, you're actually being asked to choose between, should I give a one-time gift? Should I give a monthly gift? Or in version B, you kind of have this third call to action sort of placed in line there. It's a little bit further away, but it's still in that same decision line. Choose your donation level, one-time gift, monthly gift, or donate with PayPal. Are those really related? Are those the same thing? Can I give a one-time gift and also donate with PayPal, or a monthly gift with it or without? And I don't know what you want me to choose here. This doesn't seem like a choice that I'm even able to make. This is what we call confusion friction. This leads to a 65% decrease in donations. So be careful what types of things you're asking your donor to do. Are they equipped to actually make that decision, or is what you're asking them to do confusing? Be careful of things like this. Here's another example. This is actually really common as well. Gift verification pages or gift confirmation pages. In version A, this organization actually had a verification step. So you've just completed the donation form, put all your info in, you hit donate now, and then you come to this page. And I don't know if you can see it in the example here. That little button at the top and then at the very bottom says process donation, which means that the donation is not actually done. But they had this hypothesis. Maybe people are coming to this page and actually thinking they're done and not seeing this little gray button. And that was exactly the result. Once they removed this verification step, they saw a 176% increase in donations. We see this commonly, and we call this steps friction. If you have too many steps, if you have page load after page load after page load, you're actually slowing people down, you're making it feel like more work, and it's a huge point of friction on your page that can lead to a decrease in donations. So be careful of this. Ideally, your whole donation form is on one page. You click donate now, donate 70 bucks, whatever it is, and you're done. That's the ideal situation. But in many cases, we actually see 30% of nonprofits had 3 or more steps required to complete a donation. Now, there's lots of tools that have sort of these little widget boxes that don't require a page load, and maybe they have 2 or 3 steps, and you clearly see where you're at in the process. Those are interesting, and there's some data to say that those could be effective. I'd encourage you, if you're going to use one of those multi-step little widgets, to test it and make sure you know the exact impact that it has on your page. Here's a checklist for you as you consider what to ask for in your form. Are your form fields grouped together, making it feel like it's less work? Do you have form fields that are perceived to be unnecessary? Do you really need to require someone to choose a gift designation, or can you put it in an unrestricted fund for them? And then number 3, have you eliminated things like verification pages and any unnecessary steps in this process? This is a really interesting one and a really common one. Make sure, if you're going to do one thing today around the form fields, make sure that you're not asking for information that's perceived as unnecessary. 40% of organizations required non-essential information to complete a donation. Some common fields, again, are phone number, actually requiring a phone number when you don't really need it to process a gift. Things like titles, like Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or senior, or different titles like that. Requiring those is not a great idea. So there's lots of different options there, but go through your page and make sure that you're not requiring things that aren't necessary or aren't perceived as necessary. And then number 5, the supporting message, the 5th key area. And this is where we'll end here, is how do you support your message in the proper proximity? This is kind of the underlying principle behind your supporting content. Getting things in the right place to address potential points of concern or anxiety in the mind of the donor at the right time on the page. Here's just a fun little example. I'll give you a second to look at this. Is this an example of poor placement? This is always kind of the debate whenever we have sort of a workshop and we get some feedback. Is this, maybe someone actually owns both of these, which would be a kind of an interesting business model. So maybe it's actually a very intentional placement, but it feels like poor placement. Weight loss versus getting a pie right afterwards. And this one is funny because what do you think of when you see the letters WTF? You're probably thinking worship, teaching, and friends, right? Probably not. We aren't expecting those signs to say worship, teaching, and friends. We're thinking something else in our brains. This type of placement of our content where you put something there that's unexpected happens all the time on donation pages and can lead to some significant changes in results. Version A is just a typical donation page. You've got a headline, you've got this background image, you've got some copy, and then you've got your donation form. Version B is the same exact page, same exact form, but there is one little key difference, and that is this testimonial. Now, testimonials can be a really powerful thing. They can help boost credibility. They can help someone understand the impact that their gift can make. It's a way of getting someone else that's not you, the fundraiser, someone else, a third party, actually saying that your organization is awesome, or you should support this organization because they do this great thing. Third-party credibility is what they're going for. But in this case, it led to a 48% decrease in donations. And we've started to see this pretty commonly when you take a testimonial and you put it in line instead of on the right column or like down near the form. It actually can tend to lead to a decrease in donations because it breaks up the copy in an unnatural way. Where in version A, you've read the headline, you're reading why I should give, and then the call to action is made and you're ready to give. Version B, I'm ready to give, and then you kind of slow me down and sort of break things up with this testimonial. Maybe it's pushing the form now down below the fold. It can have unintended consequences putting it there in line. We commonly see it be effective on the right column down towards the form, because that's where people start to actually ask questions. When they're getting their credit card out, they're starting to ask, can I really trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, that they're going to make the impact that they say they're going to have? And then you see a testimonial from someone else saying, hey, yeah, they did what they said they're going to do. And now trust is being grown and trust is being built, and you can have a lot more confidence when you actually give that gift. So consider that. Put your testimonials in the supporting content position on the right side. An interesting little, I'll even call it a trick, because it's kind of a fun little tactic, is actually boxing out your credit card information just with a gray box. There is no difference in the security of version A or version B. They're equally secure. But what version B does is uses a little bit of CSS and a tiny little padlock icon to reinforce at the time when someone's putting in critical information, like, hey, I know you're worried about your information. It's secure. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. You're addressing that point of anxiety right at that point on the page. I would imagine if you put this padlock at the top of the page, it's not going to have the same effect as if you put it right here at the credit card info. Because in the URL, there's probably a padlock if you have a secure page already, but it's not making the same impact as putting the padlock down here by the credit card info. This led to a 9.5% increase in donations. And we commonly see that every time we run this type of test. So if you can do this, it can lead to anywhere from like a 5 to a 10% increase. So consider that on your page. One common area that gets so underutilized on any type of landing page is the space right below the final button. So the forms here on these pages are exactly the same. The amounts are the same. It says donate 70 bucks, but version B uses the space under the button to actually reinforce the value of giving, reinforcing, hey, it's a tax-deductible donation. It's going to power our nonprofit services. Here's what it's going to do. And just by adding that little sentence, reinforcing value, reinforcing impact, led to a 31% increase in donations. Again, the question is why? Because when you get to this point in the donation process and you're about to click that button, there's no turning back. The gift is about to be processed once you click that button. So it's the final check in your brain of like, I know I've gone this far through the process and I trust you, and that testimonial told me I can trust you, and I do, but do I really? And so you're just reinforcing that value at that final moment, the moment of no return, if you will. And it led to a 31% increase in donations. So consider how you can use copy below your donate button to actually reinforce the value of giving. Here's your checklist for supporting content. Number 1, are you testing your reviews before you place them in line in the main copy? Make sure you put them in the supporting content position. If you want to put them in the copy, I would test it to make sure it doesn't have unintended consequences. Number 2, when it's time to put payment information in, are you actually reinforcing that it's secure? Using something like a padlock, graying out that area, doing whatever you can visually to say, hey, this is secure. Don't worry about it. You can trust us. Number 3, are using the area below the button to actually reinforce the value of giving and the impact of a donation. If you're going to do one thing, again, I would try doing this. Maybe it takes a little bit of extra work, either from some IT or developer support. But if you can do this, every time we've implemented leads to anywhere from like a 5 to a 9%, 10% increase in donations. So I'd consider implementing that if you can. Now, those are our 5 key areas where we commonly fail donors, but there's, again, as you've seen, there's some really practical, really simple ways that we can start to move the needle, increase our conversion rates, decrease that donation failure rate, and actually align with the motivations of our donors in a little bit more effective way. There's a lot more we can talk about. Again, we're going to talk more about it in the course later on that we have coming up in July. But let's review a couple of these key principles to make sure these are solidified and you know some next steps that you can do today as you go look at your page. Number 1, with your main message, you want to make it as inclusive to your ideal donor as possible. You're not trying to reach the whole globe. You're trying to reach your ideal donors and all of their varying motivations. Number 2, the design of your template. We don't want it to be distracting. We don't want it to be misdirecting. So remove all of those navigation things that are pointing people to other options besides giving. Make sure you have a streamlined page that's leading towards the ultimate goal of the donation. Number 3, donation selection. Avoid appearing too transactional. You don't want people to be thinking about what they can get back in return. You want people to be thinking about the impact they can make with their gift. So avoid appearing too transactional in nature. Number 4, personal info input. Just a reminder again, you want to support your message in the right proximity. That's the supporting message. I got those out of order. But with personal information input, we want to make sure that they perceive that it's less work. And then finally, supporting content. Make sure your message is in the right and proper proximity, addressing those points of concern and points of anxiety at every point along the page. Now, we have some time for Q&A. We have some time for questions. So you can use that same chat box that you were using at the very beginning. Put your questions in there. I assume there's probably been some questions so far. If you have additional ones that have come up, put those in there. While you're putting those in, just a couple of reminders. Number 1, we have this donation and landing page course live workshop going on virtually. We'll host it through Zoom. It's coming up on July 1st. So if you want to go deeper into both main donation pages, but also campaign pages, instant donation pages, email acquisition pages, and just underlying theory behind what makes an effective landing page, you can actually get certified by the end of this course. If you just go to nextafter.com/virtual-workshop, you can find all the details. You can register there. Again, it costs $199 per person. So we're trying to keep the cost as low as we can to make it as accessible to as many folks as possible. So feel free to check that out. And then you are actually the lucky winners of being the first people to have the opportunity to download this ebook. So honestly, I just finished it up this morning, but it's called 5 Deal-Breaking Questions to Ask When Choosing a New Donation Platform. If you're a fundraising executive, or you're someone who actually is kind of in the seat of making those decisions about what does our tech stack look like, what does our platform look like, how are we being equipped, how am I equipping our team to be able to achieve our fundraising goals using technology? This is a really interesting just set of questions that you can ask related to these data-driven ideas to increase revenue. So it's 5 questions that you can ask related to getting the right tools in place to actually lead to the right growth strategies. So you can get this free checklist and white paper. It's about 8 pages long. I get this at nextafter.com/5questions. You can check that out. And then shoot me an email. Let me know what you think. Again, you're the first people that we're releasing this to. I'd love to get any and all feedback from you. So feel free to check that out. Brady, do we have any questions?
We sure do, Nathan. They're flooding in right now. So a couple that came in earlier on, a couple tactical. One was talking about, is it better to actually embed the donation form within your own website, or is it okay to maybe have someone click and link out to another site? What do you suggest, or do we have any data on this?
Yeah, I'd say regardless, well, ideally it should be embedded on your own website for sure, for sure. Some things to really consider is how does it actually affect your ability to measure your results? Really commonly, if you're linking out to a different site, what often happens if you're using something like Google Analytics to track your website behavior, what's leading to donations, if you link out to another site and you don't have the analytics implemented in the right way, you can actually lose a lot of the tracking data. So if you're sending emails to lead towards a donation and then they have to click to a different site that's not your primary domain, they might end up looking like referral donations when they come back to your website. And you might think, wow, we have a lot of people that must be linking to our page and we're getting donations that way. But in reality, it's really just your emails that are what's most effective. So when it's off of your site, there can be a lot of tracking issues that come up. So I'd be really careful about that method. So ideally, if it can be on your site, on your domain, embedded on a single page, as opposed to linking out to like a PayPal specific page or another processor, I would get it on your page as much as possible.
Yeah, great point. If you do have to link out, having it on a subdomain or something that's similar domain, at least there's some of that trust and consistency, as opposed to going to a totally different URL, which can be very disorienting for users. So Good one there. Speaking of payment processors, we had a couple questions. One person asked, Dennis asked, do you think it matters what payment donation options are provided? PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay, etc. Does that play a role?
That's a great question. We've done some testing around that and seen varying results, I think, based on audiences. I know from people we've talked to, some folks have had great results using PayPal as a processor, not necessarily using PayPal like the specific PayPal widget, linking to another page, but using it as a processor. But we've tested things like Apple Pay and Google Pay, and what we commonly see is they don't make a significant difference. They don't normally lead to a decrease, but they don't often lead to a big increase either. It's kind of like a wash. But it may be really important to start implementing those things and testing into those things so that you're prepared for the future as those become more and more popular and native options. Now, it probably is going to vary depending on your demographic and how many people who are more like boomers and matures are coming to your page and donating. If you have a slightly younger audience, I would hypothesize there's more familiarity with using something like Apple Pay. But again, that's a great one to test into because right now it's probably going to vary depending on audience, depending on organization. But I wouldn't be afraid to implement additional processors, but be sure and test it so you know what's happening.
Yeah, and maybe this ties into another question we got around adding the option to do a corporate sponsorship. Should you add that as another option to your donation page? Or should that be on maybe a different type of page that we haven't talked about that could be useful? He said, leading the witness.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. This question has come up a few times just in the past couple of weeks, which is interesting. Seems to be a popular idea right now. I would be really careful of trying to implement that directly on your donation page. We did a study, and we're actually in the process of doing a study specifically on higher education organizations. And one thing we commonly see, because it's really common in that space to use corporate matching and things like that. One thing we commonly see is that those tools embedded on that main donation page can cause a lot of friction because you have to, search for a company and matching employers and things like that. And especially if it's not really relevant to the specific donor, it's just really clunky and can be really hard to use and to wade through. So I'd be careful of implementing that directly on the main donation page itself. It's a great follow-up option that could come on a confirmation page. I've also heard of people seeing some great success using just a follow-up email campaign, trying to use the data that they have to identify who's likely to participate in something like this and using a dedicated email campaign to do those corporate sponsorships and corporate matching campaigns. So there's some different options for you. Brady, do you have any other thoughts there?
No, just you should always have a ways to give page, which that thing is great. You can load that bad boy up with all the different types of ways people can give, different payment methods, different information, legacy giving. That page is an informational page. So here's a bunch of information for you to find what you're looking for. Whereas on your donation page, that's an action page where we need to be creating and curating and developing an experience that is, creating that velocity towards the donation, and anything that you throw into the mix could be taking away. So that's one mistake or something that we see a lot of organizations do is they kind of combine a ways to give page and a donation page into one, and it gets really jumbled. So corporate sponsors, great on a ways to give page, as Nathan said, probably not on a giving page. Garrett had a question about the array. You kind of touched on it, but maybe just a bit more clear. He asks, putting the asterisk in ascending or descending order.
Can you repeat that one more time? You're cutting out just a bit.
Garrett asked if you recommend putting the gift array in ascending order or descending order.
That's a great question and a really common one. And we didn't get into all the details of things we've learned about gift arrays. Gift arrays can actually be really complicated in terms of the psychological impact that they have on someone processing. How much should I give? How much should I give now? Should I give one time, recurring? There's a lot of factors at play. We recommend going from lowest gift amount to highest gift amount because if you go the opposite way, what typically happens with a gift array, especially in the case of new donors, the gift array is helping sort of set the bar for what is the level of expectation of how much I should give? How big of a gift is actually valuable? So if your first option is $10, then I feel like I can give $10 and I'm contributing value. If your first option is $1,000 or $500 and then it goes down from there, I'm going to go to the first option first and I'm going to think, well, I came in with the intention of maybe giving $50, but you're asking for $1,000. And even if I see it down here in the gift array, what you're first recommending to me is $1,000. And so what I might be thinking in my mind is, I don't know if my $100 gift is valuable because they're looking for $1,000 donations. And so what we've commonly seen using that type of strategy going from highest to lowest is a decrease in both average gift oftentimes and total donations. So I would make sure that you use a lowest to highest gift array.
And where we've seen that be particularly effective is with recurring gifts. When you're focused on monthly gifts, where we've seen an increase in conversion and no difference in average gift for monthly gift when you start with a smaller amount. So definitely if you're focused on recurring gifts, which leads to the next question, segue. Is it more effective to have one-time and monthly recurring options on the same form or keep them separate?
Great question. Great question. And some of these are well timed. We've just had some recent experiments to validate some of these ideas. What we found is defaulting to a monthly gift amount when you're using like radio buttons below the gift array. If you're trying to force someone into the monthly option that way, that can actually lead to a decrease. One hypothesis is that they've already selected how much they're giving. And then you're asking them, do you want to be one time or monthly? And so they may have come into it thinking, I'm going to give $50 now. And then you're trying to default them into a monthly gift. And then there's a lot of friction there, a lot of concern, like, oh, you're trying to like upsell me? I don't like that. But what we have found is actually a really effective way of presenting it is before the gift array, having a tabbed option. So you have one time versus monthly, and you have it actually just on tabs within the same form. There's some tools that can do this. So within the same form, it doesn't require a page load, but one time versus monthly in a tab, and then you move into the gift array. That seems to be most effective. But yeah, I would be very careful. If you're trying to put them both on one page, be careful of defaulting to that monthly, unless you're using something like that tab form where it's very clear at the front which type of gift you're going to give.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider, if it's one time or recurring, if you default to recurring or monthly, there's a good chance you'll lose donors. But especially if you're a small organization, it might be worth it actually to get fewer donors, but have them be higher value or higher monthly donors. So that's where you got to figure that number out for yourself. Is what's that break even point for a monthly compared to a one time. I got a question here. Our donation widget allows us to split the donation process into 3 pages. So it goes amount, info, address, and then credit card. Is it better to have that or all in one page? So kind of the 3 steps or the 1 step?
That's good. And I think when we teach this course, I know something, Brady, that you often say, talking about things that we've tested and things that we know, things that we believe. So it's a little bit looser, things that we believe to be true, than things that maybe we want to test or are interesting. Would be great to have more data around. That's one for me that is interesting, and I really would like to have more data around. I believe that you should, probably the safer route to go at first, unless you've tested it, is to actually use a single page, so without having the multiple steps. But even just recently, I've seen a little bit of data to suggest that those multi-step like widgets, where you have maybe 3 steps to enter all the different pieces of information, can actually lead to greater conversion. What I haven't seen is an actual side-by-side split test to prove, either way, which one's more effective. Again, going back to steps friction, where we see really commonly when you have multiple steps with full page loads, that can actually slow things down. But through one of those little widgets, I would test it. And if you do test it, I'd be so interested to see the results. So feel free to share that. That would be really great.
I think you touched on a really good point there around it gets into testing methodology, but it's really around like risk reduction, right? So having a single page with all the steps on it is really, really low risk, right? There's not a lot of ways to screw that up. There's a good chance that you have a good experience. Whereas if you go the 3 steps, maybe it's great, quick step, 1, 2, 3, you get people in motion, but it's also pretty easy to get wrong, where it could feel like, is my donation done? So you open yourself up to having more risk. So that's the other thing that we're trying to teach and train from is, that's part of the reason why removing visuals sometimes can be useful. Is it's really hard to get images right. So just remove it. It's a little bit safer and plays more people. So I think that applies to steps as well. A couple questions now around trust marks. We had a question earlier from Karen who was saying, could you put a donor testimonial kind of at the bottom of the page as opposed to in line? Where else could you use donor testimonials? And then another question from Emily related, could you put charity rating, charity navigator? Could you use those on your page somewhere strategically as well to increase trust?
Yeah, those are good questions. We didn't look, for the sake of time, didn't look at a specific example showing a testimonial in that supporting content position, but that's where I'd recommend it. If you have some sort of donor testimonial, rather than putting it in line, once you get past the copy, then you have the form, I would put the testimonial here. So right next to the form, really. So as you're filling out that information, you can see this third-party person saying, hey, this organization's awesome. Here's the impact that they have. And I'm so excited that they used my gift to do X, Y, or Z. Or maybe it's someone who was actually impacted by the cause. I'm so glad that this organization helped me with X, Y, or Z. So putting that in that supporting content position to the right side of the form can be really effective. As far as trust marks go, again, talking about proximity, where do you put it at where it's going to be most relevant? I would put it as close to that donate button as you can. Because again, when you're clicking that donate button, it's like the point of no return. Once you click that button, your gift is processed, you're done. So it's that final check in your brain of like, can I really trust them and trust what they say and trust what they're going to do with my money, and they're going to steward it well, and they're going to manage it well, and they're going to make an impact. And then you see something like a charity navigator seal or a guide star seal that just reinforces like, hey, this is a reputable and verified organization. You can trust them. That's what it communicates. So I would get those as close to the donate button as you possibly can. Now, something interesting and a common follow-up question to that is, well, what is the best seal to use? What's the best trust mark to use right next to my donate button? And there's some really fun research out there to actually suggest that what you put there, the seal you put there, doesn't necessarily matter. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you do this, but there is an experiment I've seen where somebody actually went in Photoshop and they made a little fake seal, then put it right next to the button, and that led to the same impact as anything else. Now, we want to be trustworthy and we want to be honest and we want to be transparent, so I don't recommend you do that. But all that to say, if you're talking like Charity Navigator versus Guide Star versus Better Business Bureau, just have something. Just have something and get it close to that button.
Great. We had a few questions around kind of call to action language. The last one here is from Chris. How do you call someone to action on a donate page? Do you reinforce the value of the donation? Can you talk about that kind of call to action statement or what you could do to actually have that on your donation page?
Sure. There's a lot of things we could talk about related to that. If you recall that experiment we looked at towards the beginning when we're talking about messaging, that really the key difference that led to the increase was going from talking about here's the headline, here's what we do, here's the impact we're making, and then the form, versus here's who we are, here's what we do, here's the impact we're making, will you give? Having a specific call to action is what's most important. Actually taking the time to put copy on the page to say, will you give, or your donation to X, Y, or Z is going to do this, making it very clear that the next step is to donate. To make this impact, you must donate. So however you wordsmith it, it needs to have that sort of next step action that's implied. It could be as simple as saying, will you give today to impact X, Y, or Z? So that would be a great starting point, starting place to start to just plug in your values there. Will you give to impact X, Y, or Z? And it can be a whole paragraph. It can be a single sentence. I would try to bold maybe the specific call to action header. That's what we typically call it. And then you can have some supporting context, maybe a short paragraph below that specific call to action header. There's lots of ways to tweak it and to change it up and to wordsmith it, but make sure that the copy you use actually calls someone to action as opposed to just saying, it'd be like donations are great, and then hoping they give. Like that's not going to be effective.
Great. It's actually pronounced X, Y, and Z, but that's fine. We had a question earlier. We had a next question earlier from Charity. She said she's using a donation tool that's kind of crappy and clunky. We won't call it out by name, but it rhymes with eRapistry. And she said, we can't make a lot of the changes that we kind of were suggesting, like, what do we do? So one, I'm sure other people have tools where they're saying, hey, we can't make these changes. Are there certain things that we've seen that you can change even with crappy tools? Or what would you say to people that are just using a bad tool in the first place?
Yeah, well, number one, I would say get that ebook from this slide. Go get this ebook because this is going to give you some really key questions to ask when you're looking at your own tool or you're looking at other tools. Evaluating what platform to use, these are going to be really helpful questions. Not to think about the specifics of the technology and how it's going to work with your CRM, but specifically, is this tool going to help me implement strategies that are proven to work? That's the goal of this ebook, so that's interesting to consider. If you have specific tools that you use that can do this, feel free to sound those out in the chat. It'd be interesting to see what you all are using. One I would recommend that we trust a lot is called Raise Donors. We know Stephen and Chris over there, and they're amazing people They actually have tried to implement a lot of our testing and research into their tool specifically. So that's great. It has a lot of flexibility, a lot of different integrations that you can use to tie into existing tools and then implement some of these strategies that we've been talking about. So again, that's called Raise Donors. You can check that out. But it's one of several tools. There's so many donation tools available out there. So use this criteria again from this ebook to start to evaluate different tools that might work for you. But Raise Donors is one that you should check out for sure.
And there was another question earlier around processing fees. Just, keep in mind that this is how you actually bring in donors and dollars. So trying to go for what's the cheapest processing fee or what's the cheapest way to collect donations could be very short-sighted, and you could actually be hurting your revenue overall. So, obviously we know there's budget constraints and things like that, but be very, very careful when choosing tools and technology to just go with whatever's cheapest or easiest available. Sometimes it can really kind of hurt you in the long run.
And then following up, I think I missed the end of that question, which was, if you're locked into a specific tool and you can't really do anything about it right now, what can you do? If you can focus on what, you can almost always change all the copy. You can almost always change all the copy. Maybe you can't change the specifics of like form field headers or things like that, but you can change the main copy. I would focus there because you're going to see the biggest impact in how you craft that value proposition. 9 times out of 10, that's the type of test that really moves the needle in a significant way. So really hone in on your copy, even if you're locked into a specific layout or design.
Yeah, great point. Peggy had a good question. If I have additional kind of giving questions that I need or want answered, where can I ask those? Would you like to hear more about legacy giving, or can we be added to your will? Where do you suggest people add those types of questions in the giving process?
Gotcha. Now, if you'll recall, we had that one example that had sort of a 2-column approach where on the left hand, I'm not sure which side you see is left or right. This is my left hand. So on the left column, they had like an image and then a bunch of ways to give. And then on the right side was the actual form. And then in the treatment, what they did that led to an increase in donations, they actually, instead of eliminating all those different ways to give, different giving options, they actually took those and just moved them down below. They moved them below the form, down to the footer. So they're out of the main iPath, because the primary action that we want someone to take, and most people are intending to take on that main donation page, is to give now, as opposed to give some other type of gift. So you can move those things down below. So there's still an option. The footer is a really common place that people look for those types of like additional links into deeper content. So you can place those down in the footer. You can also experiment, with having a specific like ways to give page linked from your navigation, from your homepage. So you can find it if someone's going to yourorganization.org, you can find that ways to give on the homepage while you still have a separate donate button called out in the navigation.
Great. Louise asks, is it a good idea to have an in memory or in honor gift option on the donation form?
This is one of those where I don't know if we've actually, isolated that specific element. I know for some organizations, it's really important because it's like an ongoing part of the vast majority of donations. So I don't want to say like a hard yes or a hard no. I'm inclined to say, and I'm inclined to believe that you should take that and put it more on the confirmation page. So after you have the gift, then you give the option to make it in tribute to or in honor of. Or maybe if you have it on the donation page, if you have this ability, maybe you just have a small link. So you don't show all the form fields and make it feel like a lot of work. If you have a little link that then triggers sort of a drop down of additional fields, it says, would you like to make this gift in honor of someone or in tribute to? You can click that, and then you've got like your 3 additional fields you have to fill out. Any way that you can continue to have that without interfering and interrupting the main process, because you may have people that are trying to give a gift that aren't even considering making sort of a honoring gift or a tribute gift, and they're just going to be confused as to why they have these additional form fields and they don't know what to do with them. So again, I don't want to give you like a hard yes or a hard no. It kind of sounds like a cop-out answer, but I would test it and make sure you know exactly what's going on your page and find ways to at least get it out of the primary iPath and not require those fields or make it feel like there's a bunch of extra work in order to make that gift.
Yeah, guessing by Louise's spelling of honor, she's in Canada, where it's a lot more common actually on our donation forms and pages to have the in memory in honor. And this is what's cool about learning the principles, right? If you can take some of the principles like messaging and clarity and value perspective of the donor and reducing friction, hopefully we can start to figure out maybe there are better ways that we can do it. Like you said, it expands, it comes on step 3 after the donation. Maybe it's on a ways to give page and that's specific for tribute giving. from what I've seen for making a bunch of donations to Canadian charities, oftentimes it's like a little checkbox that just says an honor, no context. Then you've got an open form field that you're supposed to put some message. Don't know what you're supposed to say. Don't know where it's supposed to go. Don't know actually what happened. And so people might be filling that out, but then the question I always have is, well, what happens now? And what do you as the organization do? So I think if you really wanted to focus on an honor, then you should call it out, make it specific, set up a donation flow that has some of that language in it, and probably remove it for everyone else. That's more of where I would lean. But again, it's that kind of, how do you take the principles and apply it to something like this? Francie asks, should we ask if they want to be added to our mailing list or just add them?
That's a complicated question. It sounds simple enough, but it's complicated based on all the different regulations that are out there. If you're in the States, it's typically fine. If they've just filled out a donation, they've completed a donation, you have sort of an implied opt-in. You can email these people. But as you get into Canada, things get a little bit tighter. And then as you get into, especially like Europe with GDPR, things are really tight. If you have concerns about the legal nature of an opt-in, I would put a little checkbox on there to get explicit opt-in. It doesn't have to be anything super complicated. It can be, now I'm not going to be like your legal counsel here, but something that you might try or maybe run by your legal counsel if you're concerned about that. Having a little checkbox opt-in that says like, we can use your information to send you emails about updates on our organization or something like that. In general, a donation is going to be sort of like an implied opt-in. But if you have concerns about that, especially if you're like fairly international reaching, maybe do your due diligence to talk with maybe a legal counsel, someone who understands the law more, but also taking just a little effort to get a more direct opt-in could be safe. So again, it's one of those like trying to mitigate risk while still trying to be conversion focused.
Yeah, and it's the same in Canada. There is more tricky laws, but they don't apply to fundraising. So you don't have to get explicit opt-in to add someone to your mailing list. But what we would suggest is then in that thank you email, so that they get the receipt, maybe not the very first email, but in those first couple emails, and hopefully you have some kind of welcome series, you should mention quite early on, thank you so much. As a donor, we'd like to send you, email communications, let you know the impact of your gift and other ways you can get quoted. If you prefer to not receive those, you can manage your preferences, or you can offer that unsubscribe. Like that should be built into the front end of communication so that they don't feel baited and switched. And if they really don't want to receive your communications, then great. You don't want them receiving your communications. You'll waste money in the mail, or you'll waste time and attention and deliverability issues on the email side. So if you don't have that opt-in, then you should still make it clear pretty early on that they will receive that type of information from you. Good question. The questions are winding down. If you have some more, we're happy to take them. But one that came up a few times is, do you have any good examples or good charities and nonprofits that you point people to, or that they could look at to see what is a good optimized online giving page look like? Do you have any suggestions, recommendations?
That's a great question. If you have thoughts, feel free to jump in. I'm thinking one interesting tool that we have, I don't have the direct link for it here, but you can find it on our site. We do have this kind of like dashboard tracker related to COVID-19 and how organizations are fundraising right now. It's actually really cool in terms of showing you, email volume right now, what verticals are sending what types of emails at what times and how much. And at the bottom, there's actually an option where you can look at the specific emails to get ideas, at least of how to craft your messaging, and you can go and look at what those donation pages look like. But those aren't necessarily curated by like what's going to be most effective. Now, if you actually look at some of the specific studies that we have, again, we mentioned at the very beginning this study we did with raised donors on the state of nonprofit donation pages. Those studies are going to have some specific examples of things that are good, things that are bad, and are going to call out some specifics that you might use, at least as inspiration, if not a model. So you can check those out if you go to nextafter.com/resources. You can find all those different research studies at the top of the page there. Brady, any other thoughts? Any other places you can think of?
Yeah, I know on our client list, at least one that I use a lot when teaching is Family Life. So if you go to familylife.com. Now they may have a campaign running where it looks slightly different, but if you look for that kind of real simple page, headline, a lot of copy value proposition, they often use bullets, reinforce the transaction. Sometimes they'll do some donation anchoring. They're generally a pretty good one. And then for other examples, I know when we score donation pages, Environment organizations typically score really high. They have a great combination of good user experience plus good messaging. So some to maybe check out over there, like Sierra Club. They do a lot of testing. They do recurring really well. Environmental Defense Fund is another one worth looking at that often scores pretty high. So those are a few organizations that you can look at. So I think that's going to do it for now, Nathan. Thank you so much for putting together that content and sticking around for questions. Thank you all for coming and for the great questions. Stay tuned for the recording and some more resources that we'll send your way shortly.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just one final word, and I've been saying this more often lately. I would just encourage you to don't be overwhelmed by the amount of things that we went through today, because there's a million things. You saw that template with all like the 19 different ways you can improve the page. They each have like 4 or 5 experiments supporting. There's so many things that you can do to try to improve your page. Don't be overwhelmed by that. But I'd encourage you to not live in your fears, but actually take a step forward, see what you can do even today to make an impact and make even just a little bit of a tweak or a little bit of an increase. So go look at your page in light of what we've just looked at. Maybe make a donation to your own organization today and see what the process looks like. And then maybe just pick one thing that you can do either tonight or tomorrow or by the end of this week to just make a little bit of an increase and a little bit of a step forward. So that's my encouragement to you. Best of luck as you try that. If you have any questions, you want to follow up, you can feel free to email me. You should have that, but it's nathan@nextafter.com. And then I'll have those links and recording for you this evening. Thank you so much for spending an hour plus with us. This is some of the best time that we spend and we love it. So thank you for being with us and learning today. All the best to you. Take care.